introduce Miriam Otoo from... okay. Regarding the 2012 World Water Prize winner, IWMI. Am I correct? Why reuse is important?
I'm not going to take any credit for that.
Okay. Congratulations.
Well, I'll take it. I'll take that. I'll be sure to let all the researchers know. But anyways, okay. Thanks, Lucia, for the introduction. I'm mainly going to talk to you about why waste reuse is important and really looking at the tail end of the sanitation value chain. And in that regard, give you a brief overview of what we're doing in terms of resource recovery and reuse in the sanitation sector from IWMI's perspective. Well, so we're all very familiar with this scene in low-income developing countries where waste management simply cannot keep up to pace with urbanization. If we look at local government budgets, they simply cannot accommodate the increasing costs that are related to providing sanitation services to communities. But it's interesting because while there are tons of nutrients that are available in human and animal waste streams, we see that particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, we have large areas of land for agricultural production where they're mainly degraded and we have nutrient depletion. And so when you begin to think about it and consider smallholder farmers, most of them cannot afford to buy fertilizer. And so again, there's this great mismatch between not being able to address sanitation and provide waste management services where you have significant sources of nutrients, and then smallholder farmers needing nutrients and water in that regard. And so when we think about it, there's a great mismatch. We're wasting resources while there's a need for water, nutrients, and energy. And so, for example, if we think about enhancing recovery of resources, there is significant potential for wastewater to be used for irrigation and aquaculture. If we think about energy, for example, all the waste that comes from agro-industrial sector, such as rice husk and sugarcane bagasse, that have potential for the recovery of energy is not being exploited. If we consider, for example, fecal sludge, municipal solid waste, significant sources of nutrients for agricultural production that are still being ignored. And so when we think in general about waste management, waste reuse, and food security, we find that there's great development potential in terms of improving waste management, increasing food security, providing environmental benefits from improved services, sanitation services, and in a sense also sometimes generating social benefits, not just from employment generation, but for small-scale farmers that have use of these nutrients from the waste streams. However, one might ask, well, if there are millions of tons of waste in the system, you're considering fecal sludge, wastewater, why don't we see this being reused on a large scale? Well, there have been initiatives that have been aimed at resource recovery and reuse, such as conversion of municipal solid waste to compost for use in agricultural production. However, these have been highly subsidized, and usually you don't see these going beyond pilot scale, and so there's very limited upscaling and replication of these initiatives. And so with the little research that has been done, we find out that there are fundamental gaps in the sense that we have been focusing on solutions related to technology provision and haven't paid enough attention to the economics and the institutional linkages that are necessary. Business thinking, we don't see a lot of business development in terms of the inclusion and the integration of, for example, the private sector when we begin to think about waste reuse in the sanitation sector. And so what we have seen is a plethora of development initiatives that have failed with very limited success and donor investment not being leveraged in that regard. Well, there is some hope in the sense that we're beginning to see that there are entities such as the private sector and even the public sector that are now adopting and implementing innovative business models. And these are related to, for example, in the agricultural sector where we're seeing fecal sludge being treated and pelletized, fortified, being used for agricultural production. And we also see commercial approaches where you have different partnerships between the public and the private sector where wastewater is being reused for irrigation and aquaculture. And these allow these entities to recover some of the cost in order to ensure that they provide sanitation services to their communities. And of course, there's potential for energy to be recovered from fecal sludge, as I mentioned before. And so in that regard, if we're seeing these innovations or these innovative business ideas coming up, it's important that we begin to think about how to replicate these enterprises. And so in that regard, understanding the factors that are actually driving these entities to be successful. Is it the market that is driving their success, or is it access to their waste, or is it the institutions that are providing an enabling environment for them to operate? So in that regard, this takes us to one of the major objectives of a new research program at IWMI, which is looking at resource recovery and reuse. And our major objective is to increase the scale and viability of productive reuse of water, nutrients, organic matter, and energy. And we're looking at different waste streams. Domestic, mainly organic waste streams. We're looking at domestic agro-industrial waste. And specifically, we're trying to achieve this by analyzing and developing business models that entrepreneurs in the private sector and even the public sector can take up and implement. And as I mentioned, is one of the subdivisions in our new CGIAR research program on water, lands, and ecosystems. So there are several projects within this research program, and one of the projects that's currently being funded by SDC, we're working with several partners, where we're not just looking at how to recover resources and develop business models that incentivize the public sector to be a part of it, but we're also looking at the development of sanitation safety plans, because you're dealing with waste, and if we're thinking about the use of waste, it's important that we consider health as well as environmental risk. And so it allows us to work with different partners, but in a sense promote things that would be beneficial and not have a reverse effect on society. And so the main research approach that we're using for this project, it has a research phase and an implementation phase. And the upper arrows is the part where it's being led by IWMI, where we're looking at business model development. And in the research phase, we're analyzing empirical cases to actually understand, learn from existing cases, what factors are driving them to be successful. If it's successful in Africa, for example, in West Africa, it would make sense to replicate that similarly in East Africa. And in the implementation phase, we're actually looking to investing specifically in business startups, as well as scaling up existing businesses that we deem to have potential. And we have donor funding that have been pledged already for this phase. And so right now where we are is we're analyzing several business cases, and we started with 150 plus cases, and this database is growing, that we identified across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, with special emphasis on the MENA region, considering wastewater cases. So we've moved on and we've selected from this large database 50 plus cases that we're analyzing in detail to understand the market dynamics as well as the business strategies that these entities adopt to actually make the businesses successful and have sustainable performance. And of these 50 plus cases, we've been able to identify 18 distinctive business models. And these are related specifically to wastewater reuse, nutrient recovery from fecal sludge, municipal solid waste, and energy also from different agro-industrial waste streams. Now, our target is to develop 25 plus business models that cuts across all the different waste streams and processes, but also that are tailored to different entities. So it's not just for the private sector, but also for the public sector, in order for them to be able to recover cost for sanitation services. And we're targeting the private sector, business schools, public sector, as well as donors with the outputs that we're going to come up with in terms of business models. And our key beneficiaries in this case, as I mentioned, the public sector, these are municipalities that are looking to recover cost in order to ensure sustainable delivery of sanitation services. Farmers in the agriculture sector that will have easier access to cheaper alternatives in terms of nutrient sources. And of course, low-income communities that range from increased access to water, energy, and And I think that's that. And I'm going to say thank you. And please, if you know of any interesting business cases, reuse business cases, especially in Latin America, please let me know. And of course, you can get additional information on our research program on these websites. Thank you.